That is a very clear experience and example of colorism. Like, it is real. It happens.
When
like,
you're
I think
lighter, yeah, people treat you differently.
like, that's
They
what I think
really
this conversation
do.
really needs to center on. Why is it societally that being lighter skinned has very clear material advantages?
Well, okay, in the future.
Great. I'm guessing this is going to be an incredibly anti-white racist video because the little snippet showed that people are complaining about light-skinned people. If you don't think that's wrong, then you're unaware of your own racism, because if you replace the word light with dark, people are going to complain at you. I'm sick of this racism only goes one way bullshit. Racism goes every way. Why can't we just treat each other like decent human beings? Also, let's see how long it takes for Vice to say the word whiteness.
Oh, far.
A lot of pink today.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today. My name is Alexis Johnson. I'm a correspondent with Vice News, and I'll also be acting as our moderator for today's panel. We first want to put out the disclaimer that, we've done our best to get you all here today of different ethnicities, different shades, different skin tones to talk about this topic, but we realize we can't represent everybody in this discussion, okay? Today, we're going to be discussing a topic that, as a brown-skinned Black woman moving throughout the world.
Oh, here we go again. The leftist, as a blah 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 person moving throughout the world. What are we even talking about? This sounds exactly like when Ayanna Pressley kept saying, as a Black woman, and when Tracy Ross said, navigating the world. You're reminding yourself what race you are because why? Leftists always mention their race because they are obsessed with race. They want the rest of us to care as much as they do, which is why they shove it in our face so much.
It's something that I think about a lot. It's something that I hear being discussed a lot, both in real life, online, in the media. Today we're here to talk about colorism. What is colorism and how do you define it?
Hi, my name is Koa and I identify as biracial. I think about colorism as a distinct hierarchy that is anchored in a proximity to whiteness.
Oh, there it is. Whiteness. 1 minute and 18 seconds in. Did I call that one or what? You're so predictable, Vice.
Interesting. I think colorism is internalized racism. I'm Calvin West, and I am an American.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Maya. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm Black. So I actually think that colorism existed before racism, and the fact that historically, for example, if you look at Europe or Asia, like serfs, peasants, people who were in the lower classes had to work and toil in the sun, and those who were royalty or aristocrats or whatever tend to be lighter skin, and so there has historically been a privileging of lighter skin over darker skinned individuals. But I think that with the onset of global white supremacy fueled by European colonialism, 1492 onward, it was then absorbed into racism.
So many fucking words. Serfs, peasants, and other people that worked outside got suntans. People that were royalty stayed in the palace most of the time and didn't get suntans. That's all she's saying with all of those words. I'm pretty sure white supremacy doesn't have a hold on how suntans work. See, this is the propaganda bullshit I'm talking about, where you take a scientific fact that skin tans and you put this narrative of white supremacy on top of it. You make it sound like there was a conspiracy theory in history to keep all the lighter skinned people inside while all the darker skinned people were forced to toil outside. The narrative turns the scientific fact of suntans and adds some lie behind it to turn it into a weapon to push racism on people.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. I identify as Iranian. As someone who's from like an Asian country that wasn't technically colonized, we even have colorism in that idea even without people coming in and telling us that. So it's almost like a preconceived idea that's in our heads.
I'm a mixed race Puerto Rican. And in the Latina community, you can understand it very much as a caste system where there is no shame to address darker skinned people by slurs.
So no one has explained what the fuck colorism is yet, but I'm not surprised. Sophia has given the closest hint to what it may be, which is being racist against your own race. So it's like Latinos being racist against other Latinos? So it's racism inception. That's what colorism is. How insane is this? Why does this even exist? Why the fuck do you give a shit if someone is darker than you? My God.
Okay.
There are personal consequences for colorism. There are also systemic consequences. And colorism has implications for public health, beauty, and all sorts of things in society.
TK says there are consequences and implications for colorism, but she doesn't define it. The moderator asked for a definition, and TK has not answered the question. If I asked you what a treadmill is, and you say there are consequences and implications that treadmills have for public health and beauty, that may be true because it's exercise equipment, but you haven't answered the question. What is this epidemic of people not answering fucking questions?
Okay. So you said that you feel like it is internalized racism?
The blackest experience any black person can have is another black person telling them that they aren't black. And that is something that happens to lighter-skinned black people because there's this idea and that I've lived a different life because I'm a lighter skin. And that, to me, is the most anti-black thing you can do to anybody.
Kelvin says he's been discriminated against by other black people because he's lighter skinned. This confirms that colorism is racism inception. They're being racist to themselves, and I don't understand why. Why do you have to be mean to somebody who's lighter than you? Why do you have to be mean to somebody who's darker than you? Why do you have to be mean to anybody based on anything that superficial? The answer is those people who act like this are racist.
Maya, what are your thoughts on that? Sorry, I saw you had a little bit of a reaction there.
Oh, me?
What do you mean, oh me? Your name is Maya, is it not?
Yeah.
So I think often when lighter-skinned people talk about experiencing bias from darker-skinned people, I think that my first thought is just like, remember that colorism is an ism. And like when something has that ISM, it means institutional power plus prejudice. Darker-skinned people as a class of people do not have the ability, the institutional power to, for example, put you in prison for longer sentences because of being lighter-skinned.
Okay, here's a giant piece of propaganda. She said a lot of words to say black people can't be racist, which is bullshit. Kelvin says that somebody says that he wasn't black because he's not really dark. You telling Kelvin that he's not allowed to be annoyed about that obvious racist statement from that other person is you being racist towards Kelvin because you think he doesn't have room to complain because he's not really dark. That's literally you being racist to Kelvin because you made judgments about the validity of his statements based on his skin color, you twat.
Or, having less access to employment. There's actual statistics where like a darker skinned person with a master's degree usually has less employment opportunities or is less employable than a lighter skinned person who has a bachelor's. And it's not to say that like bullying is like, I know that hurts. Like it's like personal sentiment. I know that actually feels bad. But I think that it's important to remember when we're talking about whether racism or colorism or anything that's an ism, that there's an element of institutional power that is added on to the prejudice.
I do feel like when darker-skinned people express their frustration to lighter-skinned people that their lives might be different, harder. I think you sort of have to acknowledge your privilege, or else it's very ignorant, even though we're both black.
Okay, propaganda number 2. Privilege. Leftists act like people whom they think have this magical privilege have never had any issues in their life. You tell people like Kelvin that he has privilege while you lecture him about what he said? Is it a privilege to be lectured at by an entitled narcissistic leftist telling me what I'm supposed to think about things? I don't think Kelvin thinks your lecture is a privilege. You're saying lighter people need to shut the fuck up, and that is racist.
What specifically does that mean? Like, I've had experiences in my life that have not been great, and I can assume that it's because of the color of my skin, right? We talk about these ideologies, right, which I think we get lost in sometimes, and we have to just bring it back to reality of like, well, let's talk about your situation for a second. How has it affected you specifically? And the answers that you get are, I didn't get an apartment, I didn't get a job, I didn't get that promotion, which happens to everybody, right? They can always talk about somebody else and what's happened in history, but they can't talk about their own lived experiences. And that's important.
Kelvin brings up the exact point I mentioned earlier. Just because he's lighter skinned doesn't mean he's never had any issues. You can say this with any kind of victim group that the left tries to victimize. There is always a third option, but leftists always look at race as the only option. Everything is racist when you're part of the left. Why do you think everything is identity-based? Maybe you didn't get the job because you're an asshole. Have you ever thought of that? Some people don't interview well, but that can be changed by learning some interviewing skills. Think about the third option that may be the source of your problem. You'll actually be more open-minded when you think this way, as opposed to the narrow-minded view that everything is racist. Everything is racist when you don't have a brain.
I have plenty lived experiences. I mean, we could go from for me, I'm in the beauty industry, the beauty world, so I get invited to influencer events, and if I look around and I'm the darkest black person, there's still a problem there. You know what I mean? That's a perfect example of that. And you might not realize it, but white people, lighter skinned people, they might be more willing to approach you because you are of lighter skin. That's another.
I don't normally comment on people's appearances because I don't give any fucks. But I will say something about Isaiah's makeup here, since he said he's in the beauty industry. I'm trying out Isaiah's look on my face. What do you think? Are you sure you're a beauty influencer, Isaiah? Do you know how to put makeup on and have it look good? People put makeup on for fun and to look good. Maybe that's why people don't approach you at your beauty influencer events. Maybe you need to be better at your job. Also, I don't approach someone based on their skin color because that's racist, okay? Can you get it through your stupid head that not everybody thinks like you? I know leftists want us all to be racist, but the rest of us don't want to, okay?
Sure. Personal thing have you realized that?
Yes, I can acknowledge that may be the thing. Here's the other thing that happens. The other side of that, the other perspective on that is that I've done a lot of things in the acting world. I've missed roles because I'm not dark enough. And there's a lot of black people who don't know that. They have no idea that your skin tone is actually highly sought out for.
But I feel like that's acting, you know, they're looking to fill a specific role, whereas if you're just applying for a job, you know, a lighter skinned person might get that opportunity over a darker skinned person.
Here we go again, using racism to justify why you didn't get a job. You know some white people don't get hired either, right? What's our excuse? We're not transparent enough? Do you seriously think that only super pale people get jobs? Do you think that if two white people are competing for a job, the employer will pick the white person who's lighter because that's what an employer is looking for? Do you know how ridiculous you sound?
I get so many personal testimonials from young, dark-skinned black girls who are very detailed about how colorism affects their life. So obviously colorism is a systemic issue, but I think an important part of it is the personal battle like young black girls endure. These girls are being bullied. Some are as young as 14, 13 years old, having really mental health crises in middle school. There's also so much research about how colorism shows up
Okay. Again, everyone gets bullied for something. People are immature fucks in middle school, and some of them grow up to be immature fucks as adults, as evidenced by this Vice panel. Boys will get bullied if they're too skinny. Girls will get bullied if they're too fat. People will get bullied if they're too short or too tall, or if their name rhymes with something the other kids can easily make fun of. I had a bully in middle school who loved to play psychological mind games with me. She was shorter than me, so I hardly found her intimidating. One day, she stood in front of me when I was sitting down tying my shoes in the gym locker room, and she said, "I will slap her if she looks at me," talking about me like I wasn't in the room, but I just ignored her because she was stupid. So spare me your fucking sob stories about getting bullied, because everyone gets bullied.
Systemically, there's research on public health and the different health outcomes darker-skinned black people have as opposed to lighter-skinned Black people. And there's one about pulse oximeters like being used during COVID and how the devices have a harder time registering darker skin. And you can imagine the implications for that. And we know that the Black community has been disproportionately affected by COVID in terms of like deaths. I don't think that evidence can be divorced from the anecdotes, because the anecdotes just supplement that evidence. They help put that evidence into context. And I'm so fascinated by the growing scholarship around colorism, because I think it's about time people treat colorism with the same seriousness they treat racism.
Lamar, what are your thoughts?
When you come with statistics like that, that's the kind of supporting arguments that we need, as opposed to kind of moving away from the anecdotal, in my opinion, right? Because we're talking about something so big and so huge that affects everyone who is alive. I'm in the middle, colorism exists for sure. I just think there's a lot of confirmation bias in our personal experiences that might drive us right to that term when it could be a number of other things.
I agree with Lamar when he says,
I just think there's a lot of confirmation bias in our personal experiences that might drive us right to that term when it could be a number of other things.
He's talking about the exact same thing I did, where leftists see racism everywhere, even when it's not there. He's also saying that there are other options for why something happens, which is also what I said earlier. Lamar is correct.
But she's talking about how particularly darker-skinned women engage with structures, engage with power, engage with institutions. Per that exact point, there are continuing studies that show that in instances in which darker-skinned women do report intimate partner violence, domestic partner violence, bruises on their body, strangulation marks are harder for police to see, nurses to see, physicians to see, because a lot about how they are trained and the way they interact with those victims are attuned to look for those marks on lighter skin tones.
I don't think doctors and nurses are trained only to look at the skin surface when they're examining patients. They know that some injuries lay underneath a person's skin, no matter what the person's race is. If you're getting abused that often by being punched or strangled, it will damage the tissue underneath your skin as well. It will be sensitive to the touch. So if the doctor is examining your arm, even if you're dark and you say ow, the doctor will probably figure out that you may have a bruise where he touched your arm. Hospitals can also use MRI machines to see a patient's organs, bones, muscles, and blood vessels. If a patient comes in and says they're hurting, but they look physically fine on the surface, doctors and nurses turn to things like MRI machines or touching the person's arm or leg to check for further issues.
Morons!
And so that also impacts a lot in terms of who is seen as the victim, who gets resources, who gets proper medical attention. A lighter-skinned woman who presents like I do, who walks in with something that reads very clean cut, is likely to get more attention in an already deeply misogynistic and racist and sexist body than a woman who is much darker than I am.
So they seem to have presented a lot of evidence and studies. Are you changing your mind at all?
As well as self-lived testimony, as well as anecdotal evidence. It goes back to how you feel about yourself.
I feel like it sounds like you're saying racism is like a choice almost.
Of course racism is a choice. You guys are choosing to see racism every goddamn where you go, even when it doesn't fucking exist there. If you didn't see racism every fucking where you went, you might be able to focus more on your job and creating beauty products that you could share with the world and be successful with.
How you respond to racism is, absolutely. And I know that that's uncomfortable, and I love it. This is my wheelhouse, trust me. How you respond to racism is a choice.
I'm hearing, particularly on this side of the room, this idea that you can make an individual choice outside of the context of history, culture, politics, structures. I don't believe that personally. I think when anybody buys a certain product, styles themselves a certain way, decides to not style themselves a certain way, read a certain book, use certain words in a job interview, approach a politician, I think all of that is informed by history, literally all of the time.
What sort of dressing would you like with your word salad today?
Yeah.
we don't want to talk about anybody's individual experiences of it unless it's an experience that is affected by colorism in the way that you guys are comfortable with it. Colorism also happens on the other end. When I talk about the internalized racism and how lighter skinned voices, they don't get heard, they don't get pushed out there within the Black community, that I get eye rolls, I get, people, there's a reaction to that is very negative and not welcoming. And
I'm not in the business of denying people their lived experiences, like who am I? But I think we can also acknowledge that those things happen. Like lighter skinned people have like certain experiences where they feel invalidated because of their complexion. And we can also...
Can you acknowledge that colorism affects lighter skinned people?
There's no such thing as reverse colorism. Same way there's no such thing as reverse racism, reverse sexism, any reverse ism. That's what I believe.
Okay, that's your opinion. I respect it. That's your opinion.
Agree. Maya's racist because she said she can't be racist towards a lighter-skinned person while invalidating Kelvin in the same breath. Hypocrite.
In the sense that the experiences you're talking about that circulate around like all this coded language of like you're not actually Black or you're not Black enough or like quantifying,
which also happens with white people.
I
just
didn't
want to
finish
let that,
speaking.
What is it with leftists and no manners? Kermit did this in the Asian Vice panel. He said, "Please, I'm talking." What is it with leftists being extremely condescending, rude, and disrespectful to everybody? I didn't finish speaking.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add to your point. Go ahead.
I have experienced versions of that myself, and I do not consider that to be colorism. Colorism is distinctly about a system and resources and visibility and autonomy within those systems.
When a lighter-skinned person is saying that dark-skinned people are allowed to be racist to light-skinned people, the light-skinned person is part of the problem. You're not telling the truth. Although what Maya said about there not being any reverse racism is true, it doesn't mean that dark-skinned people are allowed to be assholes to light-skinned people. What it means to not have reverse racism is that all of it is racism. If you're racist to a white, Black, Asian, Mexican, or any other person, it's all racism. It's all wrong because racism is a sin. Why do I have to explain this? This is not that difficult. Stop treating people differently because of what you think their face or their skin says about them and treat all people with humanity. The golden rule is to treat others like you want to be treated. If you want others to treat you kindly, then treat others kindly. If you treat others like shit, don't complain when people treat you like shit because you will have deserved your treatment. The golden rule is a moral choice that is designed to make society a pleasant place.
Like, to add on what she said, like, about the whole bullying and things, like, that actually does happen. Like, I've been bullied just for, well, I consider myself as brown skin, but back then I was, like, really dark skin. And I did lighten up, like, probably 2 shades, maybe 3 shades because of it.
Can you tell me why you started to bleach your skin?
It's like you growing up in school, you have mainly guys making fun of your skin color and calling you charcoal, calling you dark. So growing up, you just start to feel like, oh, okay, no one likes me because of my skin color. Like, okay, I see. So that kind of does something to your head, you feel me? And also we have social media. They do praise lighter skinned women, Latinas, whatever, pale skinned women. So that kind of makes you feel like you're not desired, you feel me? So, and that's why I started bleaching my skin. That's why I started skin lightening because of it, And, people that do buy my stuff, like, they do tell me that it's helping them feel more confident. And I know it's kind of sad, but it's like, that's the society we live in now.
So when people buy your stuff, can you talk about your business and what it is that you sell?
I sell skin bleaching cream. Pretty controversial, I know, but I do have negative comments. People saying you hate yourself, you wish you were white, this and this and that, you're a follower, like just a lot of stuff, but I don't really listen to it. I really don't care. I guess how society sees dark women, like we're basically the losing team. Like, who wants to be on the losing team? I felt like lighter skinned women, they they were more desired and they get away with more and they have more privileges than I did. And also, I also thought that, personally, I also thought I looked prettier lighter. And for me, I honestly I don't think it's a big deal because I feel like people want to be darker and people want to be lighter. So I don't see why it's such a taboo. I'm not ashamed of it because I kind of see the hypocrisy in it.
Being a lighter person, I do experience a tremendous amount of privilege, and I'm not denying that of you at all. I think what upset me about the skin bleaching is that a lot of mothers do it to their daughters, and from my own experience, sometimes your parents do it to you and you don't have the consent of the child, or someone like me could end up much lighter than I was in my childhood and kind of have an identity issue. And it's just, for me, it's a matter of consent.
It does seem like Destiny made the choice herself to skin bleach, so she did consent to it.
And also, I feel like you have to ask yourself, what's the goal? You know, the goal is to end colorism, racism. I feel like you changing your skin tone is just feeding into the cycle. And also, I think making money off of that is very kind of shady.
You know, the way to end colorism and racism is maybe stop being racist against your own self. Maybe when Kelvin talks, don't dismiss him just because he's lighter skinned. Maybe don't tell Kelvin that he can't have feelings about being discriminated against because he has privilege. Maybe don't tell Kelvin he needs to shut up because he's lighter skinned. Maybe don't tell Kelvin there isn't a thing as him being discriminated against. Maybe that's how you end colorism, you stupid shit. Stop being racist to your own selves. Also, who are you to tell Destiny what to do? She consented. And according to your leftist rules, if someone consents to something, they should be able to do it.
And some people just personally feel like they look better lighter, just like some people feel like they look better with makeup on. Why not you just tell everybody, love your natural skin, you don't need makeup. The
Not being
skin bleaching
systemically
is
oppressed from not wearing makeup, though. Whereas someone with darker skin might experience systemic racism.
It's hypocrisy, though.
It's
what I'm trying to
absolutely
say.
hypocrisy.
And that's not fair.
And I also don't think we can just ignore that there's such a terrible history of racism and colorism, and that's why it's a bigger deal to people when people are bleaching their skin versus when people are putting on makeup and yeah.
I think for me, when it comes to skin bleaching, I'm a lot less interested in the personal experience and more just like, why is this a multi-billion-dollar industry? Like,
Bingo.
why is
Bingo.
Dove,
Bingo.
something in the US that, they just sell bar soaps here, but in Asia, they literally are selling skin bleaching. Asia and Africa, the Caribbean, we need to talk about how this is like a capitalist enterprise that is invested in people lightening their skin.
That's the discussion.
That to me, I think that's why it's important to remember who benefits from people lightening their skin. I think the conversations, we need to talk about class and capitalism along this as well.
I mean, it kind of looks like Destiny is benefiting from lightening her skin. She said she likes it. She says she has a business, so she's making some money off of it. It seems like Destiny is benefiting from her own choices. Once again, you leftists say if someone consents to something, they should be able to do it. So get off of Destiny's back.
So why does makeup get a pass when it's literally the same concept?
You're internalizing the idea that being lighter skinned is prettier, and I get why. Obviously, I'm very privy to the societal pressures that would drive one to skin bleach, so I'm not trying to judge, but...
But you are, though. You are, though. But you are. And we just have to own that. Let's just own it.
I don't know how I'm judging. I literally acknowledge that. I understand why skin bleaching is a thing. I have a lot of family that skin bleaches. I'm not sitting here pretending oh, just love yourself, blah, 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 or even questioning that you don't love yourself. I understand there are so many pressures that would make someone want to bleach their skin in the first place. I just think that it is a consequence of internalized anti-Blackness. You've internalized something. And it's not to say that it's your fault. It's just we live in a world and we absorb the various messages and we are all impressionable.
I don't have much to add, but I do think that what I would like for this conversation to do is less of focusing on your personal experience of skin bleaching in the business and more of just you as someone who like had a lived experience of being darker skinned, like you saw and like you like had like the material experience of like receiving discrimination and like feeling less desirable. And like once your skin became lighter, like it opened up opportunities and doors for you. I think that that's what this conversation needs to focus on.
Yes.
Of just like actual, like that is a very clear experience and example of colorism. Like it is real, it happens.
When
like,
you're
I think
lighter, yeah.
Destiny said it was black boys at her school that initially made her feel like shit about her skin. So the colorism starts in people's heads when they decide they want to be racist against their own selves. That is the conversation you need to have with yourselves. Why are you unable to stop thinking about racism? What is so appealing about it that you keep gravitating towards it?
People treat you differently.
Like, that's
They
what I think this
really
conversation
do.
really needs to center on. Why is it societally that being lighter skinned has very clear material advantages of both beauty, desirability, romantic relationships, socioeconomic opportunities? Like, this is real.
Who here has had pressure from their mother or their family or have heard those messages from within the household about colorism, and who wants to share that experience?
So I think one of the experiences of colorism that has stuck with me, and I know that like my mother, of course, like she said this offhandedly, but you know, as a child, like that's something that's rooted in you. But I remember one time and she was just like, you don't need to marry somebody that's like your shade or darker, like your kids are gonna come out too dark. And I just remember being like, damn, like, is there something wrong with me?
I'm going to assume that Maya's mother is black because she has not said otherwise. Once again, we see a black person is telling another black person racist things about their own race. This is the kind of behavior you guys need to stop doing, and then you'll solve your colorism problem. Congratulations, you have found the source of the problem. It's thoughts like what Maya's mother has. It's thoughts like what the boys at Destiny's school had. Those are the thoughts that you need to stop teaching people to get out of this mess.
Stop hitting yourself.
Moving here after 9/11, there was a huge push, I think, in the Middle Eastern community to look as white as possible. So it wasn't necessarily that it was the beauty standard, but rather a way to not get hate crimed or to kind of stay under the radar. And so my mom would tell me things like, tell people you're Russian and things like that. So kind of like keeping a proximity to whiteness was seen as a safer idea.
Running tally of leftist words, whiteness, mentioned a second time.
Ella?
For me, in my family dynamic, it didn't come down to skin as so much as hair politics.
I guess someone else has been watching Tracy's show Hair Tales. This is where I first heard the term hair politics. Maybe this is why leftists are so cranky all the time. They put politics in everything, of their own will, and then they make up stories about how the politics makes them a victim.
So my hair, when I was a child, was very thick and straight, like a tapestry of hair, and then it got curly with puberty. And as my hair got curly, my mom, without discussion, stepped in with the executive decision that we would be straightening my hair. There was an assessment made on me as a child and then as a younger woman of like, oh, like you're almost there. Like if we can control your hair, if we can get your hair a certain texture, you could be mistaken for white. And that reflects well on us.
Again, there are some white people who have naturally curly hair. So I don't understand where this concept came from that all white people have straight hair. We don't.
Anybody else want to share their experience of colorism from their families?
When I was younger, my little brothers were much like lighter than me. So I think at a very early age, I understood that society ascribed like lightness to like femininity and like darkness to masculinity. I think a lot of what I struggled with when I was younger was like blaming myself and like not like being confused as to why I was being treated differently. So when I was old enough to understand what colorism was and how many systems are at play and that it really has nothing to do with me and everything to do with how people like are conditioned, I think it was liberating for me. That really helped me start thinking of myself as beautiful.
TK is super vague about how she was treated differently from her brothers. She thinks it's because of her skin, but she doesn't give any details like Maya or Destiny did, where they gave specific examples of people who told them their skin was too dark. It makes me wonder if she is just saying the propaganda she's been taught to say to appeal to the left.